Welcome to another Talking Feds one-on-one. The transition from a government dedicated to the rule of law and the public interest to one with a North Star of serving Donald Trump's personal and political interests has been at its most stark and unnerving at the Department of Justice, where Attorney General Pam Bondi has undertaken a series of moves that are the antithesis in many people's views, including mine, of the DOJ credo of justice without fear or favor. It's been all we can do to chronicle the jaw-dropping maneuvers coming out of DOJ without taking a step back to look at the larger trends and implications of Bondi's tenure. Until now, that is, when we have the most in-depth and thoughtful account of the nation's 87th Attorney General, and this by one of the deans of American legal journalism, Ruth Marcus, currently a contributing writer for The New Yorker. Marcus joined the Washington Post in 1984, fresh from graduation from Harvard Law School, and remained there until March of this year, serving as deputy editorial page editor, columnist, and political correspondent. She is also the author of Supreme Ambition, Brett Kavanaugh and the Conservative Takeover, a book examining the confirmation battles that reshaped the Supreme Court. She joins us to discuss her article, Pam Bondi's Power Play, which is in the August 18th issue of The New Yorker. Ruth Marcus, my old colleague and boss, thanks for joining.
It's great to see you, Harry. It's great to be here.
Okay, so the subtext of your article in the print is Donald Trump now has the attorney general he always wanted, an ally willing to harness the law to enable his agenda. And you portray Bondi as perhaps the least independent attorney general in modern history. So in your view, what does her tenure mean for the very idea that just has always seemed canonical, that DOJ represents the United States rather than the president of the United States?
I'm at a loss for which adjective to start with, but I'm going to start with two. One is it's heartbreaking. As somebody who worked in the Justice Department, you for many years, I'm sure your heart is broken more than mine, but mine is pretty broken because I've covered Justice Departments since Ed Meese. I covered the Ed Meese Justice Department. That was a very consequential and very radical in some ways Justice Department, but it didn't, I still have sources and friends from that time, and it did not behave anywhere near like the Pam Bondi Justice Department. So heartbreaking is one adjective I would use, and the other I would use is terrifying. It's terrifying, but because as much as the Bondi Justice Department talks about weaponization and uses the alleged weaponization of the Justice Department under President Biden and Attorney General Garland as an excuse for what it's doing, we have never, certainly not since Watergate, but I would argue never seen a weaponization of the Justice Department like this, turning it into an agent of retribution to pursue not just the president's political interests, but to go after and to punish the president's political enemies. I can't even keep track of the horrifying things that have happened in the last 5 days that really underscore my use of both those adjectives.
Yeah, the pace and intensity are really stunning, and we'll get back to the what happened just yesterday with Bolton. And I'll just do an aside off script, which is, as an alum, it's not simply that these are things that have never been done, but the cavalier, complete Orwellian account of supposed previous weaponizations by Garland, et cetera. There's a straightforward test for this, which is, can you name a single case where in the Garland Justice Department or previous ones where the law and facts pointed in a certain direction and the department went the other way for political reasons as opposed to discretion? And the answer is no, they can't, whereas I can name half a dozen, and as you say, the list is quickly growing. Let me just stick with this for one moment, though, because you have not simply the MAGA crowd and the Trump administration saying, oh, we're just doing what they did already, But you brought up Meese, and past attorneys general have also been accused of excessive loyalty, but it's clear that Bondi's relationship to Trump is just qualitatively different. Oh, RFK even. We really have never seen this, I think, as you accurately say, but what's the response to people who say, that's just attorneys general, they're always or frequently in the bag for the president, this is nothing new?
This is something new on steroids. We have never seen, including in the first Trump administration, maybe that's the best baseline to start from, an attorney general this actively, perhaps even slavishly beholden to the president. She, as all cabinet members do, she serves as at the pleasure of the president, but she has no political base. She has no separate kind of political identity that allows her to have some power at the Justice Department separate and apart from the support she has from Donald Trump. So she is there only as long as her presence continues to please and to be to the benefit of Donald Trump. And here I'll compare her two predecessors in the first Trump administration. Jeff Sessions, not my model of attorney general. If I were the attorney general of the United States, his portrait would not be up on the wall of the attorney general's conference room, but he was a senator from Alabama. He had a political base separate from the president's. He stood up to this president, much to Trump's displeasure, most notably in allowing, as the ethics people told him he had to, first of all, to recuse himself from the Russia hoax investigation. And for all the listeners, I did not have my fingers up in air quotes, but I hope you can hear them in my voice. And that allowed or required the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, to name a special counsel. And that's how we got Bob Mueller an investigation. So he stood up to Donald Trump and was canned as a result of that. Attorney General Barr did not do all of Trump's bidding during his first years as Attorney General. He had been Attorney General previously. He was an extremely well-respected attorney and somebody who understood how the levers of power worked at the Justice Department. He did a lot of things that I disagreed with, but he didn't do everything that Trump wanted during his first months and years as Attorney General. But in the end, he really stood up to President Trump when he refused to go along with Trump's claims that the election had been stolen from him, and most particularly with Trump's effort to harness the Justice Department as a weapon in waging that completely unwarranted set of accusations. Donald Trump knew when he got reelected or before his reelection that he did not want to make that mistake again. He tried to not make that mistake again in the unlikely person of Matt Gaetz, who was outlandishly unqualified for the position. I think every thinking American breathed a sigh of relief when the Gaetz nomination within 8 days blew up, and Pam Bondi, who had been Attorney General of Florida, was chosen in Gaetz's place. That seemed like, and I think it was, a step up. She had not been credibly accused of all the things we don't need to go into involving Matt Gaetz. But she has just turned out to disappoint across the board, even disappoint Republicans. I would call them more establishment Republicans, veterans of previous Republican Justice Departments, who thought, okay, well, this is a person who could be normal. And that is not what they are getting. This is anything but normal.
Yeah. And let me add a quick coda to the Bill Barr point, which is after he leaves, you have acting Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General who stand up to Trump again and prompt the same kind of crisis we saw in the Saturday Night Massacre. And I think both are considered one of the shining moments of DOJ to actually assert that independence. It seems inconceivable that could happen now. In fact, to get a little legal, you cite the chief of staff. Chief of staff, such a political position, and he is like Chad Mizell signing the papers, the roles of certain of the players here, including Todd Blanche. But anyway, you cite Mizell actually rejecting the distinction between the president and the United States. Can you give us a sense of how radical a shift that re-articulation of the mission of the department is, and what it leaves the country with in terms of guardrails against abusive actions?
I'm gonna read two quotes from Chad Mizell, who I just had, I thought, an extraordinary conversation with. He was talking, and I think he raised this point. I asked him about the relationship between the White House and the Justice Department. And he said, you have one client and you have to represent that one client. If you don't want to do that, then it's not the place for you. I think kind of so far so good. But then I asked what I thought was the obvious question,
the
which
softball.
is, who's the client, the United States or the president? And he said, I don't see a difference between those. I don't mean this as an attack on you, but the very fact that you asked that question shows the fundamental problem in how everybody has always, in the last 2 decades, and I think it's more than the last 2 decades, conceived of the government. The president is the executive branch. Now, your listeners, I suppose, have heard and grappled with the notion of the unitary executive. And the unitary executive is a legitimate constitutional argument that the executive power is vested in the president, and the president, therefore, cannot be stripped, for example, of the authority to control independent agencies and the authority to fire political appointees at will. So, we see a conservative Supreme Court heading, I think, inexorably in this direction. We'll see more of it next term. But there is a difference between the unitary executive and the president, who controls a Justice Department to the extent of being involved with criminal decision-making. It is completely legitimate for a president to direct the Justice Department and impose his policy preferences on the Justice Department. A president can say, I think drug trafficking is the biggest problem we have, and I would like to devote resources to that, and I would like to devote resources away from Foreign Corrupt Practices Act bribery investigations. Okay, that's fine. A president can say, the way the department has understood the civil rights laws is changing under me. That's fine. But when the president, and I'll give an example of this that was so chilling. It happened, I think, just the day before this article was supposed to go to bed. And honestly, every morning we woke up and grappled with, what do we need to add now? What do we need to add now? But for a president to direct by explicit direction or by implication, criminal investigations, no less criminal prosecutions, and to sometimes this president pretends he's not telling anybody what to do. But the other day he was at the Kennedy Center, and Pam Bondi happened to be at the Kennedy Center, I guess soon to be renamed, because she's on the board. And Trump was he was asked some question that was only tangentially related. I think it was about Ukraine. And he then said, well, the Russia hoax. And then he turns to her and he says, and I'm looking at you, Pam. I hope we can take a look at Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton. Are we ever going to let go of this? That is just so wildly inappropriate for a normal president and a normal Justice Department. And it is so business as usual for this president and this Justice Department.
Yeah, really well put. John Bolton's house and office are searched in normal times. When a former high-up official has something like that happen to them, you at least indulge a presumption of regularity. Wow, what did he do? We'll find out, but still. And Asha Rangappa, who besides being a columnist was a former agent, said, for an administration that claims to want to make America safer, the consequences of a loss of America's faith in federal law enforcement should not be taken lightly. And the point here is that people come to believe that we are, doing the most serious thing a society can do, depriving people of their liberty and the like, not based on what they've done, but who they know and what their, political affiliation is essentially abandoning everything about a criminal justice system that we hold dear. So the stakes of this are really, I think, extreme, including going forward for what some future Department of Justice inherits. Fair?
Yeah, fair. And I think we have not yet begun to grapple with the question of, once these guardrails have been bulldozed through, once the norms have been jettisoned, what is in an imaginary future Democratic administration, an imaginary future Democratic Attorney General supposed to do? Because we have two things going on at once. One is the weaponization that we've talked about, and we've only begun to see the development of, because we don't know yet whether, criminal investigations, searches like the ones that we witnessed at John Bolton's house are scary enough. We don't yet know what we'll see in terms of indictments. We don't yet know what we'll see in terms of prosecutions and convictions. You know better than I do how many hurdles there are to get to that point, but we can't forget what the cost is in emotional terms, in financial terms, in reputational terms to the people, though it may be a badge of honor to the individuals. John Bolton, by the way, I have known since he was the Assistant Attorney General in charge of the Civil Division during the Meese Justice Department in the Reagan administration. But there's another thing that's going on that we also need to grapple with, and that a future Democratic Attorney General will need to grapple with, which is the hollowing out of the department and the purging of alleged enemies. I'm not talking about people who are political appointees who normally change over with administrations, but scores, if not hundreds, of supposed, I guess we can only call them enemies of the state in Trumpian terms, who were fired for reasons that range from my last name is Comey to I forgot to take the pronouns off my signature block to I worked on the January 6th prosecutions, or I worked for Jack Smith. And so we have had purges, actual purges, and the replacement of career people with political people. What does a future responsible Democratic Attorney General do? If one side, I hate to say this in terms of sides, because that is not the way a Justice Department should think of itself. But if one side engages
and the way it has thought of itself, everything you said is with Republicans and Democrats.
If one side engages in weaponization, does that unleash the other side to engage in weaponization? Or on the other hand, are you just being a fool if you don't do it? Same thing with the purges. If one side has purged the career people and put in its own people and they've burrowed in and they're there, do you then go ahead and do the same thing and, demolish the notion of a nonpartisan civil service, which is should be at its apex at the Department of Justice? Or are you foolish if you simply allow this situation to persist? I do not have an answer to that, and we're grappling with what's happening in the here and now, but we're going to also need to grapple with what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, and of course, that's the best case scenario, right? We get past this, and we have the Herculean task of, mucking out the stables. I'm so glad you went there, Ruth, and I wanted to just linger on it a bit, because we hear or the public hears about these big headline prosecutions or actions, but the biggest effect, and you mentioned earlier, the heartbrokenness of DOJ alums is within, the last time I was at the DOJ is Garland's farewell party, and the most salient factor was everyone just extolled the career staff, the heart and soul of the department, doing the right thing, etc. And in ways we can't see. And even as a quasi insider with some friends there, I can't fully gauge. The place hollowed out is the perfect word. And again, of career professionals who listeners, whether or not they know, you just don't get rid of you. Their independence is critical. It's a really deeply reported piece. Just give us a little more, if you've discerned it in writing the piece, of like, what's it mean for the just day-to-day nuts and bolts functioning of the law enforcement responsibilities of the DOJ?
Well, as you know better than I do, most of the day-to-day activities of the DOJ occur in the U.S. attorney's offices across the country. And while there's clearly changes in priorities there, and they would not be my priorities, but that's legit. I think, with the exception of some of the highest profile offices, I'm thinking about not just the U.S. attorney's office in D.C., which was run by a fool, a dangerous fool by the name of Ed Martin, and is now being run by Judge Jeanine Pirro, late of Fox News. I think actually better than it was run by Ed Martin, but that's probably not saying that much. And I'm thinking about the Southern District of New York, where they've had to swallow the firing of Maureen Comey for reasons only having to do, as far as I can tell, with her last name, the dropping of the Eric Adams prosecution for what appears to be purely political reasons. But the day-to-day bread and butter work of the Justice Department goes on across the country. That said, what you mentioned about the Attorney
Especially
General,
Main Justice. Yeah.
But at Main Justice, I think but people are scared everywhere. I cannot tell you how difficult it was to get people, even people who have left the department, to speak to me. And I'm not talking about on the record. I'm talking about even off the record. People are scared out of their wits about their capacity to have jobs because law firms are scared and intimidated by the Justice Department. And so there is a feeling of chill and dread that permeates the department. There are areas that are completely hollowed out, basically kind of ghost ships on certain hallways of the Justice Department. And where that doesn't exist, it's sort of head down, eyes down, you don't know who might be. I mean, it sounds, it may be sounding hyperbolic. I'm worrying as it comes out of my mouth that it sounds hyperbolic, but I think this is the way it has been described to me. And what I've experienced in talking to people is people don't know who they can trust. So they don't want to do anything that could draw attention to them. And the reason that they're so scared, I'm just going to read you a quote from the Attorney General Bondi. This is to Sean Hannity in March. And I believe that this is her absolute conviction. There are a lot of people in the FBI and the DOJ who despise Donald Trump, despise us. We're going to root them out. We're starting at every level of the Justice Department and getting rid of the worst of the worst. This is the way the Attorney General talks about, and this is unfortunate enough in itself, but this is the way they talk about getting rid of undocumented people. This is not the way an attorney general talks about her own staff, except for now, the worst of the worst. But they perceive themselves to be at war with the, let's call them sandwich throwers of the world. And I am not advocating that anyone should throw sandwiches at anybody, law enforcement or not. But it is a little hard to take felonious sandwich throwing as a serious crime from people who not only dropped cases against people who did terrible harm to police officers on January 6th, but brought one of these people, somebody who was on the verge of having the jury selected in his case, had egged on violence against police officers. He is now working with Ed Martin on the weaponization task force. So pause on that. When Justice was asked, when I asked them about what they thought of this guy and how they could justify his hiring, they simply described him as a useful and important part of the enterprise. My God.
It's stunning, Orwellian, really, in the sense of truth is fiction, and not just heartbreaking, but really infuriating. And I just want to say that what you've described, I think this one bottom line here is hyperbole is not hyperbolic in these cases. Really, I've had my head turned 360 again and again, but it's really accurate. If you were explaining to just a general reader why this DOJ is different from politics as usual, which does seem to be the sort of dismissive opinion of a lot, what would you say?
Zero pretense of distinction or differentiation from the White House and the desires of the White House. Chad Mizell said he was contrasting what he called season 2 of Trump to season 1. And he said in season 2, the handcuffs are off. We get to do everything the president wants and everything that Pam wants. And I don't think that there's really a distinction between those two things. If there's anything that Pam Bondi has done to put the brakes on Donald Trump, we have not seen it.
Frigging mind-blowing.
Talking Feds is supported by the Brennan Center for Justice. In this new political era, the Brennan Center will do what they do best: defend the Constitution and the rule of law. They're prepared to fight against presidential overreach and will continue advocating for reforms to resist weaponized government, stop billionaires from corrupting our elections, and ensure every eligible American has the freedom to vote. Stay informed by visiting BrennanCenter.org.
Can I ask you a question or two about your old employer?
Of course.
So look, there really does seem to be a race for the exits. What happened there, and as to the extent you know, what's the kind of current state of morale, professionalism, et cetera, at the Washington Post?
So I worked for the Washington Post for 40 years, 40 happy.
It's amazing to be able to say statements like that, right?
I know. It makes me feel, well, I am old, so it makes me feel old to say it.
I resemble that remark. Yeah, go ahead.
And I love the institution. I wrote a piece about my departure for the New Yorker after I left, which included the reason for my departure, which was a column that I wrote disagreeing with Jeff Bezos's edict for a new direction for the opinions section. I have to say, I'm sad every day not to be working at the Washington Post. It's, a place that I love. I would argue that it continues to do fantastic news reporting. Despite the fact that we, and I'm always going to say we, because that's who I am, we have just hemorrhaged talent in the last year. And I don't blame any of the talent for leaving. New talent arises and grows, and they're doing fantastic reporting. I disagree with all of the well-intentioned and high-minded people who canceled their subscriptions for various justifiable reasons, because we need to have a vibrant set of newspapers competing with each other for the news of the day. I would distinguish between how things are going on the news side, which is hampered by a brain drain, but really performing remarkably well and without, as far as I can tell, evident meddling from the publisher or the owner, Jeff Bezos. I cannot give you as happy or sanguine an answer about what's happening in the opinion section. And I want to say that Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. He is entitled to have whatever he wants at the newspaper, but he is certainly entitled within the ethics of journalism to have an editorial page that reflects his views. There has been a dramatic shift in the focus and tone of the editorial page that is much more conservative and much more pro-Trump. I am, having been an editorial writer for many years and having been a member of the editorial board for even more years, I lament that. But the thing that I really lament and that forced me really to leave is an edict that Jeff Bezos issued in late February, which said that we were going to have two focuses, not just in the editorials, unsigned editorials, but in columns and guest columns. And that was going to be free markets and individual liberties. I happen to support free markets and individual liberties, though my views of it may be different than, say, Jeff Bezos is. He said that, and he coupled it with, and we aren't going to run things that express a dissenting view. This is really wrongheaded. It is not consistent with conversations that I had when I was in management with Bezos over the years about how he wanted a diverse set of viewpoints. The best way to help readers educate themselves about what they should think about an issue is to provide them with really sharply argued and conflicting points of view on everything that matters. But if we're going to deprive them of that, we are going to be, from my point of view, disserving readers and disserving the highest functions of journalism. And so about that, I am really, really distraught, I guess is maybe the best way to put it.
No, I hear you. And as you know, I went through a similar story and culminating in a resignation at the LA Times. So let me just ask, as we did for the DOJ, it's not simply, I think, a competition of good newspapers. If the nation's capital doesn't have a vigorous, vital daily paper, that's just a loss for the country, it seems to me. So as I asked of the DOJ, maybe we could end here. What do you see the prospects or the kind of path for the Post return to, especially on the opinion side, its former stature and civic importance?
We are in the hands, for better or for worse. It was for better for many years, of one man, Jeff Bezos. He seems to be absolutely convinced of the correctness of his point of view, even in moments when his view, from the way I see it, is manifestly incorrect. For example, the decision it's a totally legitimate decision not to run endorsements of presidents as an editorial page. I would disagree with that, but I would, suck that up and live with it. And I see the arguments on that side. It is a completely incorrect decision, especially when you're trying to attract subscribers, not get rid of them, to say that you are serving your readers by, in late October, yanking an already drafted endorsement of Kamala Harris and saying that it's so we can show how even-handed we are. A man who, really sorry to say this, there's a lot of things I like and respect about Jeff Bezos. And he, for most of his tenure at the Washington Post, did a remarkably good job of giving it the resources and the energy it needed to thrive. But this is the turn that he's taken in the last year or so is just dramatically worrisome.
Yeah. When I worked there, one of the things people said was, our billionaire is better than their billionaire, and their billionaire was the LA Times billionaire. And I went to the LA Times, so we found out a little about that. Ruth Marcus, thank you so much for being here. I wanted to say, for either fans of Ruth Marcus or people who want to do a little more of her writing, hundreds and hundreds of great articles. But I just want to commend to everyone, if you have a minute, the piece she wrote, you can find it easily, on the death of her pet dog that a few years ago, that's just stirring and beautiful and obviously offbeat, but is a great read and displays her writerly chops.
If you want
Ruth,
you want to Google that, my dog's name was Tank, which happened to be the name of a dog that Pam Bondi wanted to basically kidnap.
Where their paths cross.
It all comes together.
It all comes back. Very good to be with you. Thanks. The article again, Pam Bondi's Power Play, in the August 18th edition of the New Yorker magazine. Bye-bye.
See you, Harry. Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.